In 1959, on a wind-scraped bluff on Santa Rosa Island off the coast of California, a man named Phil Orr pulled 2 human leg bones out of an eroding cliff. Nothing dramatic, just 2 femurs, gray with age, sliding out of ancient sediment. But those bones would eventually be dated to around 13,000 years old. And here's the problem. That island could only be reached by crossing open water. The textbook said the first Americans walked here on foot, chasing game across a land bridge. Nobody was supposed to be sailing. And the field's first instinct wasn't to celebrate, it was to explain it away. Let me tell you what should have happened. Someone finds the oldest human remains in North America, and the field throws a party. Instead, what happened was quieter and stranger, and it took decades to fully understand. Start with the bones themselves. 2 femurs, not a skull, not a full skeleton, just the long bones of the legs, eroding out of a layer of old sediment on a remote island. Orr called the find Arlington Springs Man, after the canyon where it turned up. And at first, the age was uncertain. Radiocarbon dating in 1959 was crude, the numbers were loose, so the discovery sat there. Interesting, but easy to set aside. But here is what you have to understand about where those bones were found. Santa Rosa Island is not close to shore. It sits in the Pacific, part of a small cluster called the Channel Islands. To stand where Arlington Springs Man once stood, you do not walk, you cross water. And that single fact quietly contradicts the entire story people were taught. Because the accepted model was clean, it had a name, Clovis first. The idea went like this. Around 13,000 years ago, hunters crossed from Siberia into Alaska over a land bridge exposed by the Ice Age. They followed an ice-free corridor south, spread across 2 continents, and left behind their signature stone spear points. That was the beginning. There was nobody before them, full stop. It was a tidy story, a single wave, a single route, a single people, walking. Now put a human being on an island in the Pacific at roughly the same moment. On foot, that is impossible. There was no land bridge to Santa Rosa, there never was. To be here, they didn't walk, they crossed water. And that is a person. Not a specimen in a drawer, someone who lived, who ate, who died on that island, someone whose leg bones outlasted every story anyone would later tell about them. Here's the part that makes it worse. During the Ice Age, sea levels were far lower than they are today. So much water was locked up in glaciers that coastlines sat miles from where they are now. And the 4 northern Channel Islands were not 4 islands at all. They were one. A single landmass geologists call Santarosae, a drowned super island now broken into pieces by the risen sea. You might think, fine, those lower seas, maybe you could just walk out there. That is exactly the reassuring answer. And it is wrong. Even at the lowest point of the Ice Age, even with the ocean pulled back as far as it ever went, Santarosae never connected to the mainland. A stretch of open water always remained. Miles of it. Cold, deep, and in the way. So the water gap was real. It did not go away, which means the person whose bones Orr found did not stumble onto that island by accident of geology. Someone got into a boat or onto a raft and crossed. And it was not a one-time thing, because there was something else living on that ancient super island, pygmy mammoths. Full-sized mammoths had swum out there generations earlier, and over time, isolated on limited land, they shrank into a dwarf species, and the people on the island appear to have hunted them. That is not a single lost sailor blown off course. That is a population. People who came, stayed, and lived off the land and the sea. The old story had no boats in it. This one demanded them. And that is the thing the field could not easily absorb. It was not just a date problem. Push a date back a few centuries. Fine. Textbooks can survive that. This was a capability problem. Boats mean planning. Boats mean knowledge of the sea, of currents, of when to cross and when to wait. Boats mean these were not simple wanderers stumbling south behind the herds. They were mariners, so the date had to be checked. And this is where the story gets sharp. In the 1980s, a geologist named Thomas Stafford took another look. The original radiocarbon work was old and imprecise, and the remaining bone was fragmentary and precious. You cannot just grind up a priceless femur. So Stafford used a refined method, a resin-based technique to extract clean collagen, the protein inside bone, from a tiny fragment. The goal was to strip away contamination and date only what was truly ancient. You can guess what everyone hoped, quietly, that the careful date would come back younger, safer, something that fit. It didn't. The refined work landed the age at roughly 13,000 years, the number held, and a better method did not shrink it into something comfortable, it sharpened it. Now, the honest caution here matters. Precise dating of very old fragmentary bone is hard. There is real scientific debate about the exact figure, but the ballpark did not move into safe territory. It stayed old. It stayed inconvenient. It stayed on an island you can only reach by water. One island could be an accident, a fluke, a weird outlier you file away and forget. But then the mainland started producing the same kind of problem. Go south, way south, to a cold, boggy site in southern Chile called Monteverde, and to a researcher named Tom Dillahay, who spent a large part of his career being told he was wrong. Monteverde was extraordinary because it was waterlogged. A peat bog had sealed the site in an oxygen-poor blanket that stopped things from rotting. So instead of just stone, archaeologists found wood, plant remains, preserved hide, the remains of dwellings, even, reportedly, a child's footprint pressed into the old ground. And the dates came back around 14,500 years, older than Clovis, and thousands of miles from that Alaskan entry point at the far southern end of South America. Do the math on the old model. If the first people only entered the Americas 13,000 years ago and walked south, how did anyone get all the way to southern Chile 1,000+ years before that clock even started? The tidy story broke on the geography alone, so the field did not simply disagree. It came for the site. For years, the safer professional position was that Dillahay was mistaken. The preservation was almost too good, and critics leaned on that. Maybe the wood was natural, maybe the layers were disturbed, maybe the dates were off. Every objection had a reasonable-sounding version, and stacked together they formed a wall. Because here is the uncomfortable truth about how this works. He was not just arguing for a date, he was arguing against the shape of an entire discipline, against the textbooks, the museum displays, the careers built on Clovis first. When your evidence threatens all of that, doubt is cheap and belief is expensive. Then, in 1997, something rare happened. A group of prominent archaeologists, including some skeptics, actually traveled to Monteverde to examine it in person. And most of them came away convinced. The site was real, the dates were pre-Clovis, the wall cracked in public. But notice how it cracked. There was no grand apology to the man who had spent years defending a bog. There was no reckoning for the delay. The field said, in effect, well, maybe, and moved on. They didn't say sorry. They adjusted their footing and kept walking. Now go the opposite direction. North. To a rock shelter in Pennsylvania called Meadowcroft, and an archaeologist named James Adovasio, who dug it with a level of care that was almost aggressive. Meadowcroft had something Monteverde did not. Depth. Layer upon layer of human occupation, stacked like pages in a book, going down and down through time. And in the lowest cultural layers, the radiocarbon dates ran old, potentially 16,000 years or more. Again, older than Clovis. Again, in a place the clean model said should have been empty. And here is the courtroom logic that made it so hard to wave away. The artifacts were not lying loose on the surface. They were sealed in the sediment, with datable material above them and below them. A stone tool in a sealed layer cannot simply fall down through solid ground and land in an older bed. Stratigraphy is stubborn. The sequence is the sequence. So the critics reached for the one weapon that works on almost any deep site. Contamination. The region has coal deposits. What if ancient carbon, particles of coal or old groundwater, had seeped into the samples and made the dates look older than they really were? It is a legitimate scientific concern. It is exactly the kind of thing you must rule out. And Adovasio spent a very long time ruling it out. Testing, retesting, defending the sediment, the context, the sequence. But the objection had a way of never quite dying. Every time the site came up, the word contamination came up with it. Not as a finding, as a fog. And that is the quiet cruelty of it. The easiest way to bury a discovery isn't to destroy it. It's to keep calling it dirty. You do not have to prove the evidence is wrong. You only have to keep the doubt alive long enough that nobody wants to build a career on it. So step back and look at what is happening. Because this is the real machine, and it is not a conspiracy. There was no secret committee, no cover-up. Nobody was hiding bones in a basement. What there was something more ordinary and more powerful. Peer review that treated pre-Clovis claims as guilty until proven innocent. Grant committees that funded safe questions. Textbooks that had already been printed, museum displays that told the walking across the land bridge story to millions of school children, reputations built on being right about all of it. And Clovis first was not a stupid idea. That is the part people miss. For its time, it fit the evidence beautifully. It was clean, testable, and supported by real finds. The problem was not the theory. The problem was what happened when the theory stopped fitting and refuse to move. There is a phrase scientists love: extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And it is a good rule, but watch how it can rot. Quietly, it can turn into something else. We get to keep raising the bar, no matter what you bring us. Every new site gets held to a standard the accepted story never had to meet. That is not skepticism anymore. That is a moat. And here's the twist that changes everything. Every one of these sites, taken alone, was defensible to dismiss. Arlington Springs, maybe the date is soft. Monteverde, maybe the bog fooled everyone. Meadowcroft, maybe the coal did it. One at a time, you can explain each one away. But they were not happening one at a time. They were piling up. One strange site is an anomaly, 4 is a pattern, and a pattern is a threat. Then the argument stopped being about stones and started being about bodies. Go to Oregon, to a set of caves called Paisley Caves, and an archaeologist named Dennis Jenkins. What Jenkins found there was not a spear point or a hearth. It was human excrement, ancient dried coprolites preserved in the dry cave sediment, not glamorous, but inside them was human DNA. And the dates on some of that material ran to roughly 14,000 years and beyond, pre-Clovis, again. Now think about why this hits differently than a stone tool. A stone tool can be argued about forever. Is it really a tool or just a rock that broke in a suggestive way? Did a human make those flakes, or did nature? But this was human biology, sitting in a dated layer older than the model allowed. Not a maybe tool, a body, or what a body left behind. Of course, the objection came, and it was a smart one. DNA can move. Water can carry modern genetic material down through sediment. What if younger DNA had leached into older layers and made ancient material look human when the humans came later? So Jenkins and his colleagues went back at it, checking the stratigraphy, running controls, testing the surrounding sediment for exactly that kind of seepage. The site held. Now, it wasn't just tools arguing, it was bodies. And then the evidence went back to the water and got specific. Returned to the California coast, to Daisy Cave and other Channel Island sites, and to an archaeologist named John Erlandson, who spent his career arguing that the coast was the story everyone had ignored. Because at these sites, the tools were not crude, all-purpose choppers. They were delicate, finely made barbed points, small crescent-shaped stone tools, a toolkit built for the sea and the shore, for fishing, for birds, for the specific bounty of a coastline. That sounds like a technical detail until you feel what it means. This was not a group of lost land hunters who accidentally washed up on an island and improvised. This was specialized maritime technology. Gear designed by people who understood tides and kelp beds and the rhythm of the sea well enough to build tools around it. A tool like that was shaped by a hand that already knew the water, that knew where the fish ran and when the crossing was safe. Skill, not luck. So, look at what the map is now telling you. An early human on an island you can only reach by boat. Pre-Clovis sites in Chile and Pennsylvania and Oregon, and a coastal toolkit that proves the people on that shore were not amateurs at the edge of the sea. They lived in it, and if they came by water, the whole map was drawn in the wrong place. Every arrow that marched down the middle of the continent through the ice-free corridor was pointing at the wrong door. Then came the discovery that turned the argument into something you could actually see: White Sands, New Mexico. In an ancient lakebed, now a stretch of pale gypsum desert, researchers found footprints, human footprints, pressed into the mud of a long-vanished shoreline, and beside them, in the same ancient ground, the tracks of Ice Age animals, giant ground sloths, mammoths, extinct megafauna walking the same margin at the same time, and the dates on those footprints came back staggering. Somewhere around 21,000 to 23,000 years old. Sit with that number. Clovis first said 13,000. Monteverde pushed it to 14,500. Meadowcroft argued for 16,000 or more. White Sands did not nudge the line. It shattered it. It put human beings in the American Southwest during the height of the last ice age, when the ice-free corridor was not even open. There was no walking route south at that time. The door the old model used did not exist yet, and people were already here. And you cannot fight a footprint the way you fight a stone tool. A footprint is not a maybe artifact. It is not a rock that might have broken naturally. It is a person walking at a specific moment, sealed in the ground. You cannot argue that a footprint fell down through the sediment. It is where it is because a foot put it there. The footprint lasted longer than the person who made it. The fight came anyway, and it was legitimate science. The first dates relied on seeds of an aquatic plant, and critics pointed out those plants can absorb old carbon from the water and throw the dates too old. A real objection. So the researchers went back and dated the layers using completely independent methods, including grains of quartz and ancient pollen. And those methods supported the old age, not settled beyond all argument, but no longer a single fragile line of evidence either. This wasn't older by a little. It was older by thousands of years from before the corridor was even open. And now I have to take you to the far edge of this argument because it exists, and because it shows how unstable the old confidence had become. But I am going to be honest with you about it the whole way. In 2017, a team published a claim about a site in California called the Kuruti Mastodon. They had mastodon bones broken in particular ways. Alongside heavy stones they interpreted as hammerstones and anvils, and their claim was that humans, or human relatives, had smashed those bones. The date they put on it was not 15,000 years or 20,000. It was around 130,000 years. Let me be completely clear. Most researchers reject this. The evidence is fiercely disputed. Critics argue the bones could have been broken by heavy machinery during the highway construction that exposed the site, or by natural forces, and that the so-called tools are just rocks. It is not accepted as proof of anything. Treat it as the wild, contested edge of the debate, not as a fact. So why even mention it? Because of what it reveals about the shape of the argument. If that reading were somehow right, it would not just bend the timeline, it would snap it. And that is exactly why the pushback is so ferocious. The field has real, good reasons to doubt it. But here is the uncomfortable thing. Ignore the claim of 130,000 years entirely. Throw it out. The point that survives is this. Once the door moved off 13,000, once White Sands and Monteverde and the rest pushed it back and back, nobody could agree anymore on where it stopped. The clean edge was gone. The old certainty that gave everyone a firm number to defend had quietly dissolved. And into that uncertainty, even the extreme claims found room to be argued. That was the moment the debate stopped looking academic and started looking defensive. Because here is what does not move easily. Textbooks, museum labels, the migration maps in classrooms, the careers of people who spent decades being the experts on the walking in from Siberia story. None of that turns on a dime. Not because anyone is evil, because that is what institutions are. They are memory hardened into stone, and then the genetics arrived to make the tidy story even messier. Ancient DNA has now made it clear the peopling of the Americas was not one clean wave of one people through one door. It was more tangled than that. Multiple movements, populations that split and mixed. And in one of the strangest results, some indigenous groups deep in the Amazon carry a faint genetic signal linked to populations from Australia and New Guinea. Researchers sometimes call the ghost source population Y. Nobody is fully certain how that trace got there. But it should not be there under the simple story. Not one people, not one route, not one date. A family tree the tidy model had quietly pruned into something neater than the truth. And that is how you understand what really happened to Clovis first. It did not collapse in one public afternoon. Nobody stood up and burned the textbooks. Instead, it started retreating, in footnotes, in softened wording, in the slow, quiet edit of a paragraph. So here is where all of it converges, and where the missing evidence probably went. Put the pieces together. An islander who needed a boat, a coastal toolkit built for the sea, pre-Clovis sites strung down 2 continents, footprints from before the inland corridor existed. What that points to is a route the old model barely considered, down the coast, by water. Hugging the shoreline of the Pacific, living off the sea, moving south along a rich ribbon of kelp forests that would have fed people the whole way. Some researchers call it the Kelp Highway. People did not have to wait for a corridor to open through the ice. They went around it, along the edge of the world, and now the gut punch. That coastline is gone. When the Ice Age ended and the glaciers melted, the sea rose, hundreds of feet in places. Every beach those first people camped on, every shore where they beached their boats, every coastal site they left behind is now drowned, underwater, miles out to sea and dozens of fathoms down. So when critics said, for decades, where is your coastal evidence, they were asking for something the ocean had already swallowed. The evidence was not missing because it never existed. It was missing because it is underwater. And because, for a long time, the field was looking inland, where the old map told them to look. Let me separate this cleanly because you deserve the honest version. What is established? Someone reached those islands and needed to cross water to do it. There are multiple solid pre-Clovis sites. The White Sands footprints are real and very old. What is contested, the exact routes, the precise oldest dates, how the waves of migration fit together. And what is speculation, or worse, the 130,000-year Karuti claim, and any clean, final map of exactly how it all happened. Hold those three categories apart, and the story stays honest and still stays astonishing. The evidence wasn't hidden because it was fake. It was hidden because the ocean rose over it and the field was slow to go look. So, come back with me to where we started, to that wind-scraped bluff on Santa Rosa Island, and the two femurs Phil Orr pulled from the cliff in 1959, two leg bones of a person who crossed open water at the edge of the Ice Age and lay in that sediment for 13,000 years, waiting for a story big enough to hold them. Clovis, first, as a rule, is effectively gone now. Coastal migration is taken seriously, the maps have been redrawn, the textbooks softened, the museum labels quietly rewritten. But notice how it happened. There was no public reckoning, no apology to the researchers who defended impossible sites for years while the field treated them as reckless. Dillahay in his bog, Adavasio in his rock shelter, hearing contamination over and over. They were not just defending dates, they were defending the idea that the map could be wrong, and they were right before it was safe to be right. The field did not lose, it adjusted, no apology, just new wording. The old map did not burn, it quietly changed shape. And I do not want to tell you that now we finally know the truth, because we do not. The truth is that the old story was too small, too clean, too protected, and the real answer is still out there, in the last place anyone wants to dig, because the beaches those first Americans walked are under the sea now. Their fishing camps, their landing spots, the bones of the people who crossed the water first, all of it drowned when the ice melted and the ocean came up to erase the shoreline of an older world. So the real question is not whether they came by boat. They did. The question is how many of them are still down there, on beaches that no longer exist? And how many more Arlington Springs men are sitting right now in a museum drawer, mislabeled, underestimated, waiting for someone brave enough to pull them back into the light and start the fight all over again?